Puppet Combo is a recognizable name within the indie horror game sphere. Run by one person, with some outside help, they are a game developer who creates horror games with a retro style. Specifically, their games combine the aesthetics of old PlayStation games with older slasher movies. They execute the style very well, which has allowed their games to stand out, though this aesthetic definitely isn't exclusive to them. Puppet Combo has made a lot of games, probably because the lower quality graphics allow them to be made slightly faster than most other games. While their portfolio has an impressive size, I find it to be a mixed bag. Some of their games, like Babysitter Bloodbath, Night Ripper, Murder House, and Nun Massacre, are great and are among my favorite horror games ever. Some others are Planet of the Bloodthirsty Santa.
Help me, God, Beth, I'm gonna bust you down from second officer so fast you're not gonna know how to hit you.
I will admit to not having played any of the games of theirs that didn't interest me, so I may have a slightly different opinion if I did play them rather than watch them, but all this is to say that I'm not the absolute greatest fan of Puppet Combo, and I find their games hit or miss. But one of their recent releases doesn't just hit, it hits out of the park. Just like the ex-girlfriend that will never return. It's a game that perfects everything I love about horror games. Good story, great mechanics, rewarding gameplay, and a scary atmosphere with a terrifying antagonist. This game is known as Stay Out of the House. Stay Out of the House, or as I like to call it, Get Out of My House, is a stealth horror game where you're hunted by a serial killer. Just like most Puppet Combo games, actually, but this is easily their best one yet. You play as Roxanne, no, not that one, who due to unfortunate circumstances on a road trip has been abducted by actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf and is now trapped inside his house. The house that you needed to stay out of. You had one job. The game is basically Granny meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a spice of Resident Evil 7. You find tools hidden throughout the house to open a locked path, examples being find a screwdriver to unscrew vent covers, find a hammer to undo the nails on a boarded up door, etc. The puzzles are simple like that at first, but get a bit more complex the further you go. Along the way, you'll be discovering hidden passages or shortcuts that connect to other rooms with a Metroidvania-like flair in the house's design. All the while, you will be hunted down by Shia LaBeouf, who will not be happy to see you prancing around his house. If he spots you, he will charge at you with tremendous speed and easily subdue you if you're cornered. If he doesn't spot you, he'll set up bear traps or security systems to help him do so. You'll hear his loud footsteps as he walks around, but won't get much more information than that. You'll need to skulk around the house quietly, staying in the shadows where you're harder to see. You'll need to memorize the quickest path to your objective while making sure Shia isn't at your objective by either luring him away or just hearing him walk around in a different area. If this sounds interesting to you, then I implore you to check this game out before watching the rest of this video, as I am about to spoil the whole game, secrets and all. It's available on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch for $15. Quick tip. Go into video settings and set the video filter to either 1999 or off. The other options make it very hard to see. This game deserves much more attention than it has gotten, and I hope to help bring it that attention. But any horror game is best experienced knowing as little as possible. Fear of the unknown and all that. If you don't find playing horror games that fun though, I do have a playthrough from a few months ago that goes through to the end of the game. I will also upload a full no commentary playthrough shortly after this video, if that's what you would prefer. Some other YouTubers have played it as well. For those of you who have played / watched or who just don't care, let's begin. Even though I said this game perfects everything I love about horror games, that was hyperbole for the intro. Stay Out of the House is obviously not perfect because no game is. I have a fair amount of criticism, some with the game design, most involving bugs. But before that, I need to talk about what makes this game as great as it is, and why I love it so much despite any issues I have with it. The game opens with the night shift, something that might look familiar. The night shift sequence was released as a standalone demo about 3 years ago, when the game was still in early development. I remember being excited for the full game at that time, and then not hearing about it at all for 3 years. Then last year it just dropped, out of nowhere, from my perspective. Anyway, I had a weird fear that the night shift wouldn't be included in the full game and that it would stay as a separate game, but thankfully, no. It's here. Now with voice acting.
Hurry up and punch in. I've got a hot date tonight.
Was it busy today?
Yeah, customers kept coming in all night. I couldn't get anything done.
Obviously not Oscar-worthy, but not terrible either. If you decide that you hate it and think it ruins the atmosphere, you'll be glad to know there is very little of it throughout the game. So you clock into your shift at the convenience store and begin work. The night shift acts as an opening scene, where an unimportant character gets caught by the serial killer before the true protagonist takes over. Except that this opening scene is half an hour long. This is one of the best sequences I've ever played in a horror game, to the point I don't even want to talk about it too much. It needs to be experienced on its own. One thing I will note is the Power Drill Massacre minigame in the corner, which is based off of a past and apparently now upcoming game of puppet combos with the same name. It's a good recreation, in that both this arcade version and the original demo aren't designed very well, but it's a fun distraction while you wait. After Night Shift is a second and more traditional horror game prologue. You take over as Roxanne, the true protagonist, on a road trip with her boyfriend Brendan. Brendan stops at a rest area on an unknown foggy road, and Roxanne completely refuses to stay awake. Once she finally does wake up, she realizes a lot of time has passed, and Brendan still isn't back. He has the car keys, so she's forced to investigate. Not only is the bathroom empty, but there's a door going out the back of the building into unknown land. And just beyond the door is Brendan's license. From here, it's a standard start to a horror game. Strangely, I've always liked these atmospheric walks at the start of horror games because I like how well they set the tone and make you feel creeped out without actually putting you in danger. But some are more effective than others. Many horror game intros love to give you a few scares throughout the walk, just for the spooks, I guess. There's nothing wrong with these, but they are clearly not actual threats, and sometimes it feels like the game is trying too hard to scare you early on. The reason why Resident Evil 7 has my favorite intro to a horror game is because it doesn't do that. Most of the horror is found within the environment, like the dead animals outside or the disgusting pot of stew inside. There are some scary moments, of course, but these either have great build-up or aren't jump scares, just something spooky you see in the distance. Stay Out of the House takes the latter approach for this part. No scares at all. Just the strong Silent Hill-like atmosphere and the lost items scattered along the path, but none of their owners in sight. You meet a dog here, and though the dog could startle someone, its barks are quiet enough that it's unlikely. The places you go through are creepy as well. An abandoned factory of some kind, an empty church that once belonged to a devout church group known as the Church of Father's Vision, a huge field of corn extending into a private property. All of this reminding you that every step you take is one step further from safety. Going through the maze of corn, the aforementioned private property turns out to be the most evil-looking house I have ever seen, holy crap. But we're not here to judge a book by its cover. Right up until you see that the front door is wide open. The dog following you runs inside for some reason. Shortly after that, you hear a metal clang, and the dog starts whimpering from inside. This is the weakest part of the story in my opinion, because the intended way to continue here is to go inside. But can't we also go back to the road, hitchhike to the nearest town, and then call the police? Granted, I don't know how effective that would be, but that seems like a way better option to me than barging inside the house, especially when you see the chandelier made of a dead body. There is at least the fact that the dog is caught in a bear trap in the basement, which is why it's whimpering. Leaving the dog there would be a bit inhumane, but still, this game is called Stay Out of the House, and yet the one time you get the option to stay out of the house, you can't do it. I initially thought that the night shift character was the protagonist, and you go straight from that part into the main game, which would be a justifiable reason to be trapped. The fact that there was another prologue surprised me, and the fact that we just waltz into the house surprised me even more. Instead of this, maybe when you walk up to see the front door open, Roxanne decides to go back to the road to try and flag someone down. But as she turns to leave, the butcher is right there and captures her. That would be more justifiable than walking into the butcher's house as if you own it. But I can only care about this so much. Once you've freed the dog, it runs off, but as you go to follow it, Shia LaBeouf, okay, I'll stop calling him that, catches you inside his home. There's also a slightly different way this part goes if you leave the basement faster, but either way, he grabs you and knocks you unconscious with a hammer. It's been about 40 minutes so far, but now the game truly starts. Stay Out of the House is very similar to one of Puppet Combo's other games, Nun Massacre. Both games use the same engine with the same inventory screen and physics, the same items and assets, the same item and examine descriptions, the same gameplay concept with solving inventory puzzles to find your way through a big map while being hunted by a killer that moves fast and chase, and so on. Both killers even make a static effect on the screen when they're nearby. Nun Massacre was released almost 6 years ago, and Stay Out of the House is kind of a spiritual successor to it in a lot of ways. I will be comparing these two games as we go, because it's hard not to with how similar they are. Here's another shared feature right away. Both of these games allow you to skip right to the main game when starting a new playthrough instead of playing the intro, which is a really good addition. Especially for Stay Out of the House, where both prologues take about 40 minutes to go through, to the point that the opening credits could be mistaken for ending credits. Enough of that, though. You wake up inside of a tall cage that extends from floor to ceiling. There's a TV placed right outside playing evangelist propaganda, and the TV can't be turned off. Looking at the TV too long gives you a headache, so don't do that. Finding the obligatory escape method, you pick up a lighter from the dresser nearby and use it to get your bearings. You're in a small hallway area with a few rooms, locked off from the rest of the house, and it's here you get your first puzzle. Before that is a newspaper clipping talking about the man who captured you, the night shift abductor. That's kind of a mouthful, so I'll just call him the Butcher. The incident from Night Shift is mentioned here, the victim's name being Deborah Kopiske. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's also revealed that similar incidents have happened many other times, but the police have done almost nothing about it. I presume this note is here for those who didn't play the intro sequences so they can still get an image of the killer. In one of the other rooms here, there is a vent with a cover screwed on. In another room is a locked toolbox, and in the same room as the newspaper is another note that has the combination. Inside the box is a screwdriver that opens the vent. But the room also has 3 other items. The first is an alarm clock, which you can set to ring after a certain amount of time. It makes a lot of noise because it's a distraction item, so you don't want to do that for now. The remaining 2 items are inside the cupboards. One is the light meter, a valuable tool. This does not take up an inventory slot, but rather chills on the left side of the screen permanently. It measures how bright the area you're standing in is. The Butcher is not a cat, nor does he have night vision goggles. He can't see well in the dark, which is why when he searches a room for you, he turns the light on. So you'll need to stay in the dark areas as much as you can, which the light meter will help you with. It's really good this exists, because what the game shows on the light meter as being bright or dark, and what visually appears to be bright or dark, does not always match up. Always look at the light meter before judging if the corner you're in is a good spot. The other, less useful tool in this room is the sound meter. This obviously measures how much sound you make from walking around. It is good to use it for a bit, walk back and forth and jump to see how much noise is being made by doing those. But because the sound meter is a regular inventory item that does take up a slot, you can't hold it and another item at the same time, so you can't use it to see how noisy various other actions are. Once you see that walking makes noise and crouching does not, feel free to drop it. Also, in an update that happened while I was making this video, the sound meter somehow got bugged and doesn't work anymore. Amazing tool, 10 out of 10. I don't believe the Butcher is intended to patrol these rooms during this puzzle. It's supposed to be a quick opening segment to show how the game will work in a safe environment. Mostly safe. There is a chance of a tripwire trap spawning in the hallway, and triggering it will cause the butcher to come and investigate earlier than he's supposed to. You'll still need to be careful through this part. Nevertheless, you unscrew the vent cover and enter the vent, which leads into the rest of the house. You come to a forked path. To the right is a running fan you obviously can't go through. Beyond that is the save room, the only truly safe area in the game. Here is a familiar asset from Nun Massacre, a blue TV. In that game, the blue TVs were used to play videotapes hidden throughout the school to unlock the secret ending. Stay Out of the House repurposes the videotapes into a save system. Find a videotape and bring it back here to save your game. Stay Out of the House is much longer than Nun Massacre, which you can tell by the difference in price, so this save system is a necessary inclusion. But saving requires an item, meaning you have a limited amount of saves, so use them wisely. The left path in the vents is where you need to go, and it takes you past the kitchen downstairs, where you can see the butcher busy chopping something at the counter, assuming he wasn't drawn upstairs earlier by a tripwire. This is a great introduction to the butcher in this segment, and it effectively conveys that from now on, he is always going to be around. Further in the vents, you can find a note with another combination to a lock you haven't seen yet, and an opening into the dining room where you can see the security camera set up in there, if you're playing on medium difficulty or higher. The vents can be taken to drop into either the foyer or a bedroom on the first floor. Whichever way you go, you'll soon discover two things. The front door is locked from the inside and cannot be lockpicked, and the butcher is not alone. Sitting inside the living room is an old lady in a wheelchair, simply referred to as Grandma. Her relation to the butcher, whether she's his mother or grandmother, is never revealed. All I do know is if she sees you, she will let out a scream, drawing the butcher. I find it so funny how not a single word is exchanged between these two. They both just scream. At first, Grandma will stay in the living room watching the TV indefinitely, but if she spots you, she'll begin moving around the house in her wheelchair, which can even go up and down stairs somehow. Grandma acts as a mobile security camera. She'll drive her wheelchair along preset paths and can go pretty much anywhere in the main section of the house. And of course, if she spots you, she screams to alert the butcher. She occasionally stops at a few points, including the TV in the living room, the bottom of the stairs to the basement, and even right outside your cage upstairs. The amount of time she spends there, and where she goes after, is all random. But due to this and the fact that her wheelchair makes a loud noise as she moves around, she's a lot more predictable and avoidable than the butcher. Adding to this is that she has a hard time seeing you and an even harder time hearing you. There are some rooms that she cannot go into, such as the downstairs bathroom, so just duck into these rooms as you hear her getting near and you'll avoid her. It can be hard to tell which floor she's on, however, as sounds that play above or below you don't have much distinction. Grandma can also mess up plans of yours if she's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Say you lure the butcher away somewhere and use that chance to go into a room he was guarding. If Grandma decides to go there, she could just draw the butcher back down upon seeing you, messing up your plan. Grandma adds a lot to the stealth of the game, and I really like her inclusion. What I also like is the house itself and how disgusting it is. The game has a clear-cut objective: escape. This on its own isn't special. I can name so many other horror games that use the same objective. Stay Out of the House uses many tricks to make this commonly used objective feel unique. The very long introduction and plot setup that happens before this point is one part of that. Then you get trapped inside the house and see for yourself just how rancid it is. The walls are old, the wallpaper is falling apart, the vents are rusty, the kitchen is a mess of cranberry juice with a pot of human stew cooking. There are dead bodies found everywhere, some even used as furniture, such as a rug or a chandelier. There's a skeleton hanging in the shower and a bicycle made out of bones in the basement, and nearly every single light source is made out of a human body. The save room in the vents is the least gross room, and even that room has a lamp made of flesh in it, serving as a constant reminder of your situation. This, combined with the house's relatively small size, the claustrophobic hallways and vents, plus the fact that the butcher is never far away, makes you want to escape, pushing you toward that goal. You may not know where to go if you do escape, but anywhere is better than this place. The environment is also a big improvement over Nun Massacre when it comes to navigation. The school in Nun Massacre isn't massive, but it's bigger than your average horror game map, and most of the hallways and rooms look the same. This makes it really hard to remember exactly where things are, such as where you dropped an item or where a thing you needed said item for is. In Stay Out of the House, every room and hallway is visually distinct and the layout is compact and easy to memorize. I never found it hard to navigate and could always remember where rooms were. This is quite the achievement for a map that has about 5 or 6 bedrooms, a fair few hallways, 3 floors, and vents and tunnels intertwined through all of that. While I'm on the subject, allow me to give a tip. You can climb up into vents in the ceiling that you may have dropped out of. You'll need to stand on furniture to do it, but you can do it, which really helps you move around without being noticed. While we're on that topic, let's get to the Butcher himself. He's the main threat of the game, with everything else around him either helping him find you or being a much more minor threat by comparison. The Butcher stalks the house searching for you, and also listening for you. His hearing isn't incredible, he can't hear you drop an item from across the map, but if he happens to be nearby when you run or jump, making a small amount of noise, he will get suspicious and investigate, usually by searching a few rooms around where he heard the noise, and turning the lights on within them. If he hears a much louder noise, such as the alarm of a camera or tripwire, grandma's screams, the alarm clock ringing, or noises of various puzzles, he will go berserk and sprint right over to where he heard the noise. Unlike the nun in Nun Massacre, who makes no noise whatsoever as she walks around, the Butcher's loud footsteps are clearly audible and will signal his presence. He'll also create a static effect on the screen periodically when he's near, but it's not constant like in Nun Massacre, so still be careful. There are also certain scripted scenes where the static effect is used but isn't signaling the Butcher, so that's confusing. I'm not sure why that is. While the Butcher can and will patrol the whole house, he tends to spend a lot of time around the kitchen and dining room area. In the kitchen is a metal door that only he can open. It connects to another section of the house that contains the garage. The Butcher is able to go into and out of that area through that passage, meaning he can suddenly walk into the kitchen at any time with little warning. Same goes for the back door, which is also inaccessible. He can go out there, but you can't, for now. This makes the kitchen the most dangerous room in the house, which makes sense since he's a butcher. Occasionally, the Butcher will stop by the kitchen to chop the various human limbs on the counter. I really like that he can do this because this, combined with him going into that back area, makes him feel like more than just a stealth game enemy. He's not just hunting you down, he's working on other things, preparing his other victims for whatever he's doing, most likely eating them. On this note, I also like how you aren't constantly bombarded with the Butcher. He's not always around, just a few steps away like some stealth horror enemies are. There are many times in the game where there is no trace of the Butcher for upwards of 5 minutes. In these cases, he's probably just off in some other area that you aren't in, and eventually, you will see him again. I also like how the game contextualizes the Butcher always forgetting about you and going to do other things. One of the notes you find says quite bluntly that the Butcher is stupid, and seems to forget about his victims escaping, which he makes up for in his inhuman strength. His pathfinding is solid too, albeit with some quirks. He always prefers going through the dining room whenever chasing you rather than just entering the living room from the foyer, but this isn't a big deal at all. In fact, it always catches me off guard since it makes him feel kinda smart. I have also never had any bug where the Butcher sees me through a wall, which in a game with a map this compact that has some cracks in the walls allowing the player to see through the map, albeit just barely, that is a big testament to the game's polish. You can hide just behind a door in a lit up room, and he just barely won't see you. Moments like these always get the heart pumping, and it's all thanks to the well-made mechanics that these moments can exist. Now for the additional security systems. If you play on medium difficulty, there is always one camera inside the dining room. Tripwires will spawn randomly placed throughout various hallways. Both of these trigger an alarm if they either spot you, or you run over them, respectively. If you happen to get caught by the Butcher, or die in any other way, you will wake up in a new room with 1 day of 3 gone. You'll lose your items aside from your light source, and there will be new cameras and tripwires set up throughout the house. I'll go more into this mechanic later. Just know that cameras and tripwires are only added if you get caught. The third type of security, bear traps, do not work this way, and are periodically set up by the Butcher as the game goes on. Bear traps don't seem to alert the Butcher, but they will hurt and prevent you from moving until you get out of them. What's really cool about the game is that all 3 of these things can be disabled by the tools you find. The screwdriver isn't just for unscrewing the vents. It can disarm the bear traps and even allow you to set them up yourself. This turns them into safe bear traps that are safe for you to walk over, but can catch the butcher inside them, slowing him temporarily. Tripwires can be cut using wire clippers, and cameras can either be destroyed with the gun or the hammer, the latter of the two taking longer but making less noise, or you can cut their wires with the wire clippers. Once tripwires or cameras are gone, they don't come back until you get caught. If you get caught. But bear traps will be replaced fairly regularly, so be sure to keep an eye out. Speaking of the gun, this is an item you find relatively early in progression. Using the bullets you find scattered throughout the house, you can load them inside with this fun and interactive reload minigame. Once they're loaded, you can indeed shoot the butcher if he's chasing you. This does not kill him, but will chase him away for a while. It'll take a couple of shots to do, and there's only so much ammo, so you shouldn't fire away willy-nilly. Your aim also isn't 100% accurate, so doing it in a panic isn't advisable. The gun can also be used to shoot out lights. Or you can use the hammer, which makes less noise. Destroying lights makes parts of the map darker for good, making you harder to see. It may not be a bad idea to do. I wouldn't know, since I don't think to do it that often. There's one more thing the gun or the hammer can do, but I'll save that for later. Next, there's how the butcher interacts with vents, which is pretty smart. In Nun Massacre, the nun can just go inside the vents, which, although cool, makes for some awkward chases as the crawling speed is the fastest you can go. And if you go to one of the dozen dead ends within the vents, you're just as dead as that end, which can make it feel kind of unfair. There's also the chance the nun will enter the vents on her own, and what do you even do in that case? The butcher in Stay Out of the House is too big to fit in the vents, so instead, if he sees you in a vent, he'll rush to turn on a trap he has set within them. There are 2 buttons in the house that turn on mustard gas in the vents. While in the gas, you have a limited amount of time to exit the vents before you die. You can go back in afterward as long as you get out shortly after. So even though the butcher can't reach you in the vents, he'll turn on a gas to flush you out. And the butcher seems to be able to recognize where the vents lead, as he often runs towards where the vent exits are. And if you crawl out and turn off the gas right away, he'll notice that it's off and go to turn it back on. Unless you wait for a little while, then he'll forget about you, and you can turn the gas off without him noticing. One time I kept turning the gas off every time he would turn it on, and eventually, he ran upstairs to where I was because he knew I was messing with it. This vent gas system is brilliant, and addresses all complaints I had with the vents in Nun Massacre. Then there's the beds around the house. These are designated hiding places where you are mostly safe from the butcher. In my experience, he has never searched a bed on his own, even if he really seems like he's about to. He has to see you crawl under one to check it, which means he flips it over to reveal you underneath. Once flipped over, the bed cannot be hidden under ever again. However, this isn't all. The butcher is able to randomly flip beds over on his own. I don't completely understand what causes him to do it. I've had entire playthroughs go without him doing it, but it's awesome because it means you can't take the hiding spots for granted. They may not always be there for you. If you are unsuccessful in your efforts to hide and he spots you and you're not in a vent, he gives chase. Due to how small the house is, being chased sounds terrifying, because where are you supposed to run? The butcher is fast and can easily keep up, and being in a panic or cornered leads to a pretty easy death, especially with the sudden noises and blood visual effect if you get hit. Thankfully, the chase ambience volume has been toned down dramatically since Nun Massacre, so the scary part of a chase is the entity chasing you rather than the noise that plays while it happens. Anyway, you may think the butcher is hard to lose and that being spotted is an automatic death, but quite the opposite. All it takes is rounding some corners and going up or down the stairs and he's off of you. This doesn't ruin the chases or make the butcher any less scary in my opinion, because there's always that initial panic I have after being seen. You need to react quickly, because once he sees you, he's charging right at you. You could imagine that trying to find your way out of rooms and around the house to where you want to go is hard to do when there's an enemy behind you running at sonic speed who can easily kill you if you mess up. The harsh punishment of being caught makes the chases even scarier, for the most part. Again, more on that later. But even all of that isn't the scariest part of these chases to me. The scariest part is the screams the butcher emits as he does so. This might be a bold statement, but this is one of the best sound designs for any horror game killer I've seen. Or heard, rather. He makes no noise other than footsteps and low breathing for most of the time, but when he hears a loud sound or sees you or just gets mad at whatever, he makes these primal, guttural screaming noises that manage to sound human and inhuman at the same time. This is something else I love about the Butcher. You have no idea who he is. It's clear that he's a human, but he seems corrupted in some way, lacking in intelligence but compensating with insane strength. Sometimes while playing, the Butcher will randomly start screaming. He doesn't see you or anything, he just walks around yelling for some reason. I'm pretty sure this is him going around to flip the beds. At least one bed was flipped over every time he did this. The final thing I want to go over with the stealth is Grandma. I've been over her mechanics, and I'm sure you can see how well she fits in with these systems. What I haven't mentioned is that you can kill her with the gun. She only takes one shot in the head to die. This obviously attracts the Butcher due to the gunshot, and once the Butcher sees her dead, he is very loudly upset. He'll run around and flip over some of the beds to prevent you from hiding under them, which is a decent punishment for killing Grandma, I suppose. But I don't know how I feel about killing her being this easy. Grandma is a fun threat to deal with. She's simple and intuitive and relatively easy to avoid. She adds a level of risk to going throughout the house without being game-breakingly difficult. But then as soon as you find the gun, you could just kill her with one shot, and bam, she's gone. Not to mention, if you don't let her see you in the living room, then she doesn't move, and you don't need to worry about her then either. If the Butcher had a clearer change in behavior, maybe he searches the house more often and more aggressively, or he flips all of the beds over right away in a fit of rage, removing all obvious hiding spots, then this would be great. As it is, you can just get rid of a threat not too far in the game with little consequence. Though I suppose you could say the same for the security cameras. The stealth in this game is fantastic. Creeping around the house, avoiding the Butcher, Grandma, and the security systems is easily my favorite part of the game, and it's where I have the least criticisms. However, that doesn't mean it's perfect. For one thing, the sound occlusion sounds odd. Of course you shouldn't be able to hear footsteps or the wheelchair from absolutely anywhere through any walls, that would make things even more confusing. But there are areas of the house that mute all sounds of the threats in adjacent rooms, the biggest example being the broken door leading into the foyer from the garage area. Even once the boards are taken down, you can't hear anything from the main section of the house while you're in the garage area, and vice versa. There's something similar happening with the stairs in the foyer. Sometimes Grandma's wheelchair doesn't make noise as she comes down the stairs until she's fully down. This means you'll hear her wheelchair cut in and out sometimes as you traverse, which always sounds odd. Although this may have been fixed in the most recent update, which came out as I was making this video, as I found Grandma easier to hear in these situations on my most recent playthrough. It's not a huge deal though, and it's easy to get used to. Next, there was one time where the Butcher just phased through a door in the basement. There is a room behind that door that you can unlock later, but that's the only entrance or exit to that room that the Butcher can take. So unless he was just standing in that room for a few minutes and then decided to leave when I came down, I have no possible explanation for this. This only happened once though, thankfully. I've also had times where the Butcher seems to know where I am for some reason. He'll start screaming and then run right into the room where I was and check it. This may be intentional and I don't mind it that much, but still strange. Shortly after starting a new game, or shortly after being caught and respawning, there's this flashing red effect the game does with the draw distance fog, meant to represent the aches you would have after being hit over the head with a hammer. The effect itself is fine, but it's too hard to tell the difference between this effect and the view cone of a camera, both of which are red and not two different shades of red either. This is especially bad when the effect happens after being caught, since now there are new cameras placed around, but it's too hard to tell if what you're seeing is the red effect or a camera. I know for a fact this led to me being spotted by a camera because I couldn't tell it was there. Adding some kind of pattern to the camera view cone, kinda like in Alien Isolation, would help with this. Or making the flashing red effect something that happens on the sides of the screen rather than in the draw distance fog. Speaking of being caught, let's go more into the 3-day system. Even if the system is literally taken from Granny, it's a really good idea, but unfortunately it's rendered pointless by the save system. You have 3 days to escape, and every time you're caught and killed by anything, you lose a day. All your items aside from your light source will be gone, locked in the closet under the stairs, the same one the note in the vents was talking about. It's locked with the same code, so it's never hard to get into. But now there are new security cameras and tripwires set up. Sneaking around is much harder now with all the new traps. It makes the thought of getting caught feel terrifying. Not only do you need to sneak into the closet to get your stuff, but the game is harder now, and you'll have to spend more time dealing with the new security as punishment for being downed. Not to mention you're one day closer to getting a game over, which also has a cool and creepy scene. Or you could just reload your save and not worry about any of that. This will depend on how long it's been since you saved, but if you're saving semi-frequently, you'll probably just have to redo some puzzle progress. Most people are used to this kind of thing from indie horror games, so they'll probably settle for it. Most importantly, they won't have to worry about the new security systems. Redoing some lost progress may very well be easier than dealing with the upgraded security. It's not like getting caught has no punishment or anything. As I said, reloading a save can result in losing a lot of progress if it's been a while. So that may be a reason to continue with one day gone. But still, in most cases, the 3-day mechanic, as good as it is kinda pointless, since the save system exists. I can't think of a good solution for this other than reworking one of the two systems entirely. Maybe instead of making a permanent file, saving could make a temporary file that lets you quit the game with your current progress. But once you come back, it gets deleted, so you can't just rely on it for when you get caught. That being said, at least in older versions, there are some ways this game can softlock. So that wouldn't be the best idea unless the game was absolutely pristine and polished first, and I don't know if it is. The final thing I want to note for the stealth aspect of the game is one really strange bug I experienced on my first playthrough. After making enough progress in the house, Grandma started respawning whenever I loaded a save, even though I had killed her. When brought back from the dead like this, her wheelchair didn't make noise anymore, showing that it wasn't intentional. Otherwise, she worked fine, aside from the fact that she should have been dead. Apparently this was an issue in older versions of Stay Out of the House, and was claimed to be fixed, but it clearly still existed in some form. I tried to recreate the bug in the current version, but couldn't get it to happen. It has likely been fixed, and I would hope so. A major character of the game respawning upon reloading a save when she's supposed to be dead is clearly a problem. I think it may have had something to do with the scale breaking, since there was another bug that caused Grandma to scream after you break the scale. That bug has been fixed in an update that happened while I was making this video, so obviously this isn't a problem anymore. Still, it stood out as a very strange occurrence on my first playthrough. There's one more complaint about the stealth I have, but it involves a bigger criticism on the inventory system, which I shall get to later. For now, that's all the complaints that I have, and I wouldn't mind if they never got addressed. The stealth in this game is awesome, and I wouldn't have it many other ways. Now, we can finally cover the progression of Stay Out of the House, the many steps you go through to achieve your goal of freedom. These steps take the form of a mostly linear string of inventory puzzles. We've been over finding the screwdriver to open the vent. From there you find a hammer in an upstairs bedroom to take the boards off a door in the starting area, which opens to a room containing the gun, as well as another set of boards in the closet. These ones take you to a tunnel that connects to the opposite side of the upstairs. One of the rooms here has some drain cleaner, as well as a battery in the radio. There's also some opera-sounding music that plays faintly beyond the wall, and I have no idea where it's coming from. Roxanne has some kind of headache when she goes near the door of this room. This moment sometimes creates the same static effect used to indicate the butcher's presence, and it scares me every time. The battery's use isn't immediately apparent, but the drain cleaner can be taken to the bathroom down the hall, where you can see something in the drain. You use the drain cleaner to dislodge the object to flush it down to wherever the drain leads. Those of you familiar with Nun Massacre are probably saying, isn't that a Nun Massacre puzzle? And you're right, many of the house's puzzles are reused from that game. Some were likely a necessary reuse, like screwdriver to unscrew vents, hammer to undo boards. But both of these games ask you to find a drain cleaner to dislodge a hex key from a bathroom sink drain, place a wooden plank over a pit of barbed wire where it looks like you'll die, burn a rope that's keeping a cupboard shut by pouring rubbing alcohol in it and then using the lighter, use wire clippers to cut a wire in an electrical box connecting to a fan in the vents that once disabled lets you squeeze through to a new area. and collect 7 body parts to place onto a scale, after which the scale breaks, which dislodges a gear that is inserted into the back of a movable grandfather clock, where upon setting the clock to a certain time, it starts ringing and opens a secret passage to the top floor of the building. I have a theory that Nun Massacre was made as a demo for all these puzzles that had its own setting and story applied. It was meant to show how a puppet combo game of this style would work, and show the concepts for the inventory puzzles before they would appear in the more refined and complete game coming later. Getting back on track, the drain cleaner does indeed dislodge the hex key, sending it all the way to the basement. On the way to the basement is the closet under the stairs. You can go for this closet whenever you want, even before this point, and it's unlocked with the code you find on the note in the vents. Inside, Roxanne guesses that this closet is where the victim's items are taken to if they're caught, hinting that your items go here if you get caught. There are, however, 2 new things in here for you: a free safe bear trap without needing to disarm one first, which appears to have been added since my first playthrough, and the radar. The radar can track the locations of any of the threats if they're moving, the butcher most importantly. It can help for sure, but it's not the most useful thing in the world since it doesn't do much to indicate height difference. Something may appear to be right next to you, but it's really a floor above or below. The pace at which the dot flashes and the radar beeps sort of indicates this, but it's hard to wrap your head around. Also, the radar doesn't differentiate the butcher from any other threat, including Grandma, and some third dot that always comes from the same direction. I'm okay with all this since it means the radar isn't a perfect tool, which keeps you on edge. Anyway, in the closet is also a pile of easily missable notes, and the contents of these are strange. They appear to be written by the butcher himself, containing delusional rambles about something only referred to as it, and how it wants to be fed the fear of humans, and how it must feel all. These are notes that were shown all the way back in one of the earliest demos for Stay Out of the House. And when I saw that demo after playing the finished game, I thought they had been removed. Turns out, they're all here in the closet. One of the notes has 4262 written on the top, which is the way you found the code to the screwdriver box in the demo. Pushing those notes out of your mind, you go into the basement and grab the hex key from the pipe with black sludge. Not sure what that's about, maybe an early onset of the molded from Resident Evil 7? One of the notes you find earlier says that there are wire clippers in the kitchen, but they're locked in a cabinet by some rope. You'll need rubbing alcohol to burn the rope, but the rubbing alcohol is locked in the cabinet in the downstairs bathroom. Fortunately, the hex key can pick the lock and open it. This is what the hex key is required for, but you can also use it to lockpick any of the other locked drawers you find in the house. Most of them just contain more bullets and bandages, which is good, but one of them, namely this closet in the bedroom where you find the hammer, is more difficult to lockpick, not by much though. Opening it reveals the flashlight. The flashlight is a huge upgrade from the lighter. Not only can it shine farther, but it doesn't take up an inventory slot and uses a dedicated button. Finally, no more fumbling with your inventory to find your light source. Just press F to pay respects and you're good. You still need the lighter to burn the rope on the kitchen cabinet, but never again after that. Speaking of which, you'll probably want to lure the butcher away from the kitchen, or at least figure out where he is before doing this, as he really likes to hang around there, and opening the cabinet involves a couple of lengthy, unskippable animations. The simplest way to distract the butcher is with the alarm clock found in one of the bedrooms in the starting area. Clicking on its lower half picks it up, while clicking on the top of it lets you set an alarm to go off after 30 seconds, or up to 2 minutes in 30-second intervals. It goes without saying, but make sure to place the alarm clock away from the kitchen. There is a chance that the butcher will be too far away to hear the alarm clock, so distracting him in this way doesn't always work. If it doesn't work, you'll have to figure out where he is and go from there. Or just try again. You can also let Grandma see you on purpose, shoot the gun, though they use as a bullet, or trigger a tripwire if there is one. That's something I like. Even though these security systems might sound an alarm without your intention, you can use them to draw the butcher away from somewhere, provided you can get out of there before he arrives. Aside from the wire clippers, the kitchen has a host of other interesting items. There are severed body parts on the counter and in the sink, and you can pick them up for some ungodly reason. But more immediately interesting is the can on the shelf. The description says there's something inside the can, and what do you know? On the stove is a can opener. That doesn't work. It needs batteries, such as the one from the radio upstairs. What the game doesn't tell you here is that you actually need 3 batteries to power the thing. A second battery is actually in the dining room inside the smoke detector above the table. The third is nowhere near here, so we'll have to come back to this. With the wire clippers in hand, it's back down to the basement. You actually need the screwdriver again since the wire box is screwed shut, but once that's done, you clip the wire and can now go through the fan and the vents. Here you see a scene. Brendan, yeah, remember him, is strapped to a chair in the center of a well-lit room, and the butcher is circling him with a chainsaw. I'll admit, this scene could have been presented better. Not only does the voice actor for Brendan not sound that scared or distressed, but overlaying his lines is a stock crying sound effect, which is the same one used for SCP-096 and SCP Containment Breach, and that was just too distracting for me to take it seriously. Not a huge deal though, and either way, you get the point. Brendan is dead. Who knows what happened to the car keys? Just beyond this, the vents drop you into a new section of the house, the aforementioned garage area. It may be advisable to set the alarm clock going for the maximum time before passing the fan in the vent, as the butcher is clearly very nearby. Dropping down immediately is not a good idea. The garage area has a strange layout, a couple of rooms in the center encircled by a very claustrophobic hallway. This hallway branches out to two rooms. One is the garage, containing the same suspicious van you can see in Night Shift, which confirms that it is indeed the butcher's. There's some stuff inside the van, but it's locked, and you need to break the windows to get in. The other room is a very small bedroom that honestly looks more like a cell, especially with the human torso sitting on the bed. In here is another newspaper clipping reminding you that the butcher is a bad man. Below that is a cabinet with another difficult lock. You know how these work. The higher the difficulty, the higher the reward. And indeed, inside is the backpack. Another good upgrade. It increases your inventory slots from 5 to 8. It may have increased your slots to 10 at some point in development if the control screen is anything to go by. Like the flashlight, the backpack is optional, but really worth getting. Now for the two rooms in the center. One contains a bloody scale, the same from Nun Massacre. Unlike that game, this one doesn't have the hint written on the wall, which makes it slightly less clear why you have to collect the body parts. And the oh so useful, how much blood can it hold? Examine text doesn't help much either. Actually, it probably is a hint towards breaking the scale from the weight, since it might be asking how much weight the scale can hold. Examining the meter will tell you how many parts you need, so players will get there eventually. It's just a strange objective compared to the other ones. The room adjacent is a bedroom with a very bloody bed. And ceiling. This room really agitates Roxanne's head yet again, and also creates the butcher static effect that also always scares me every time. In here is a clock that doesn't work, but you can move it. In the drawers is a second hammer that has a black handle. This is on purpose. This hammer is for removing these boards in the small hallway, which connects back to the foyer and the rest of the house. This is the only way out of the garage area, for you anyway. The hammer can also break the windows on the van, so you can unlock and open it. Careful, the butcher will not be happy if he hears you breaking into his van. He doesn't always hear it, but if he does, you bet he'll be on his way. In the back of the van is a wooden plank, and in the front seat is a severed limb. Your current objective is to collect the 7 severed body parts and bring them to the scale. Many of them are in the garage area right nearby, but a few of them are in the kitchen. Bring them all over and the scale will break from the weight. The butcher won't hear this, but Grandma did in earlier versions back when it was bugged. She doesn't anymore, however. So feel free to pick up the gear that dropped and place it in the back of the clock in the other room. Once done, set the clock to 5 o'clock and one of the walls in the room will open, revealing a stairway to the attic. The attic is small, for this house's standards anyway. To the left is the room full of TVs that you wake up in if you get caught for the first time. You can go ahead and pull the pins out of the door, which opens a shortcut back down to the second floor. Just be warned, the butcher can go up that staircase and enter the attic from there. Also, the door with the pins will close and relock itself when you reload a save, which is kind of annoying, and I don't know why that is. Anyway, 2 rooms are accessible. One containing a locked drawer with a knife inside, and another containing a candy bar! The true objective! The rest of the attic is hidden on the other side of a pit of barbed wires, where Roxanne, the ever-sleuth detective, solves the mystery and concludes that it does look like she will die if she doesn't do anything about it. You'll need the wooden plank from the van to place it over the pit and cross it. You may be asking, why can't you just use one of the other boards you removed from the doors earlier? Good question. I don't know. This is literally something Granny does, which is the game that inspired Stay Out of the House. Nun Massacre gets away with it because the wooden plank puzzle is the first one. You can't get the hammer until after it. Anyway, after placing the oddly shiny wooden plank, you cross to the remaining 3 rooms in the attic. One has a ceiling fan with an item on it that's too high to reach. Unless you picked up the plank and smacked the fan, or pulled the chair over and jumped, but whatever. And the switch to turn it on has a broken wire. The next one has a mannequin that always scares me every time I enter the room, as well as a clock that's set to 1. The final one has this lovely sighting, and a not-so-hidden tunnel behind this shelf. The shelf also has a shed key sitting on it. Foreshadowing. There's another vent fan here that's always off. I'm not sure why it's there, probably just to make the vent realistic. The vent goes to a wooden board, which falls away to reveal the backyard, the most open area of the house. Here you can see the cages mentioned in a note from earlier, a fenced area with a dog inside, and a large shed in the back. If you've been using the radar the whole game, you now know what is causing that random blip that sometimes shows up. It's the dog. There are actually other victims in the cages, and you can use the hex key to open the cages and free them. Once freed, they'll follow you by pressing X while facing them. You can also press X to direct them somewhere or tell them to stay put. For right now, we're going to ignore the victims. I'd rather talk about them later since they're one of the mechanics I'm not that huge on. One of the victims has broken legs and cannot be moved. She'll say she's hungry, so you can give her the candy bar, and in return, she'll give you bandages. Not exceptionally useful since there are tons of bandages throughout the house, but hey, she's a victim, and there are only so many things victims can find around this house. When you approach the back of the backyard, floodlights will turn on. The butcher will then enter the backyard shortly after. He grabs one of the victims, sometimes the girl with broken legs, sometimes someone else, and takes them back inside. Reaching this point of the game changes something in the butcher's behavior, since even though he could go into the backyard earlier, he never brought any victims in. Until now. Using the shed key, you open the shed, and inside is a roll of duct tape. If you talk to one of the victims from outside the cage, they mention the dog, saying that it's blind but can hear you. The dog is no ordinary dog, and not the same one from the intro either, who does escape by the way. It's a demon dog. You can kill it with the gun, but it takes a lot of shots. Shooting will also alert the butcher. It's best to leave the dog alone. There's actually nothing inside its area, and the dog itself poses no threat from inside the fence. So ignoring it, we now have to sneak in the back door without being seen. Easier done than said, since the doorway is fully dark, for some reason. At this point in the game, something new will start appearing in the vents. It can only be described as some kind of demon baby, and that's exactly what it is. It crawls through the vents along with you and will not move if you stare at it. It seems passive at first, and also sounds like a dog for some reason, but it is anything but. I don't know what triggers it, possibly looking at it too long, but it will get angry and start biting you, which can kill you. This is what the knife is for. You can stab it to chase it off and eventually kill it, I think. Unfortunately for you, it can escape into one of the many holes throughout the vents that you can't pass through, so it could be anywhere. You might also never encounter the baby, which is what happened to me on the playthrough I recorded for this video. It never appeared until I saved and reloaded, and lo and behold, there it is. Its spawning might be a little screwed up. The baby's not a big deal, though it will definitely catch you off guard. Up until now, the vents were mostly safe, but now there's a chance you'll encounter this thing. Keep the knife handy when you go through the vents from this point on. I'm not sure if you can escape the baby without it. You'll also notice that the butcher has changed his outfit, by taking most of it off. Doesn't want all that fresh blood ruining his plaid shirt, I guess. His outfit oddly resets whenever you save and reload, and also resets in other scripted scenes. Not a big deal though, his other costumes were added post-launch after all. With the duct tape, you can tape up the broken light switch wire in the attic, turn on the ceiling fan, and obtain for yourself the third and final battery. Or for my first playthrough, the second battery. I'll go more into this later. All 3 batteries will power the can opener, opening the can in the kitchen. This will make noise for the butcher to hear, so be quick. And careful. Inside is a key that is too modest about itself. It is the key. The one you've been looking for all game. The key that unlocks the front door. Going out the front door does not result in a u1.png screen, thankfully. Instead, it takes you back to the front yard you went through in the prologue. The opening in the corner that you came through is gone, interestingly, and you can't climb this fence, but there is now a discarded key inside this side building. Open the locked door in here, find an open window, find your way through all the plants, and you're free. Nope! The butcher is onto you and has brought out his chainsaw for the final chase. Although, he moves much slower here for some reason. If you get caught by him, you get an instant game over and need to reload a save. Just run down the path. You have unlimited stamina in this part, likely due to the adrenaline you would feel after escaping. There is a dead end you may run into, but you can stun him with the gun to escape. Eventually, you'll be chased into a trailer park, after which, the butcher disappears. No joke, he's just gone. The trailer at the end is lit up, and so you knock on the door. And who else answers but the weird guy from Night Shift? The one who constantly stared at Deborah and said approximately one sentence his entire time at the convenience store. He asks if Roxanne wants to come inside, which she should refuse, but before Roxanne can say anything concrete, she starts to feel sick, and then vomits a leech thing out of her mouth. And then the game ends. Remember how when Roxanne wakes up at the start of the house, she says her stomach hurts? And then a couple of times after that, her vision goes blurry and she has some headaches? Well, this is apparently the source of that. A possible backup plan for the butcher in case she escapes. Roxanne's fate is never revealed. She may have died, but may also have not. Although the final chase is pretty fun, this ending is anticlimactic and a bit disappointing as a result. Naturally, you want your horror game protagonists to survive, so it's always annoying when some games pull the haha, you died anyway endings. The dark occult, formerly known as the Conjuring House from 2018, was the absolute worst in this regard. But in Stay Out of the House's case, I think this ending is anticlimactic on purpose, because it's not the only ending. If you've played the game, then you know I brushed over some things you will find while playing. In a small vent connecting a closet to the kitchen, there are some pipes that emit hot steam which you can't pass. You can see this relatively early in the game, so it will surprise you to learn that not only is the steam not cleared until much later, but it's also optional. In the backyard is a well next to the shed. Turning the handle brings up a bucket with a valve in it. Take the valve to the basement and you can put it in this hole and turn it. This shuts off the steam pipes and allows you through the vent into another room in the basement. This room contains a fuse box that's broken, just like everything else in this game. Isn't it an international law that all horror games have to have some section where you fix a fuse box? Never mind. The puzzle here is simple. You take fuses from the drawer and put them in while making sure their combined voltage doesn't exceed 200 volts. Once done, you turn the lever, and although nothing seems to happen, you may remember the yellow door locked with a keypad. Before, you couldn't even interact with the keypad because it didn't have power. Now you can. But what's the code? This was one of my favorite things to figure out, because you've probably already seen the full code by this point. It's on the clocks. The clock in the starting area says 9. The clock in the foyer says 7. The clock you interact with to open the attic ends up saying 5, and the clock in the attic says 1. 9751. When the door unlocked, I was elated. There was kind of a hint towards it, but at this point of my first playthrough, it had been forever since I saw the first clock, and I wasn't even sure if it meant anything at this point. Once I found the 3 other clocks, I pondered over them after my sessions and had the idea that they might spell out the code for that door in the basement. To finally get to this point with the code in mind and have it work was such a satisfying moment. This is something all puzzle games do, of course, but after all of the use item on object puzzles, which I don't mind by the way, this one stood out and felt uniquely great to solve. On the other side of the newly unlocked door is not just a room, but a hallway. A hallway that branches out to more rooms. Stepping inside, the door slams and locks behind you. Somehow, no turning back. A note earlier mentions a maze of tunnels underneath the house. And you are now inside. I don't know exactly what I or other players expected to find behind that one yellow door, but it surely wasn't a second fully fledged area with 3 floors, lots of rooms, its own vent system, new items, and unique puzzles and set pieces. This new area, known as the bunker, is entirely optional. Funnily enough, on my first playthrough, I couldn't find one of the batteries for the can, so I ended up going here without knowing how to open the front door. Wasn't that optional for me? It's just crazy to me that there's this whole second level with a completely different setting, and you don't even have to play it to beat the game. It's also unlocked as part 4 whenever you start a new game, so you can skip right to it if you wish. That being said, the bunker is shorter than the house, but only by a little bit. You'll have whatever items you had coming in here, which means you may have left some tools behind, but don't worry, the game will give you those tools again if they're needed. Sometimes even if they're not needed. A lot of rooms on this floor, B1, will be locked. A few will be unlocked, and these ones have cages with animals inside, such as pigs eating human corpses. The labels outside these rooms claim that they were once offices and have been transformed into animal pens. One of these rooms has a screwdriver, which you'll need to bring to this room with all the barrels to unlock the vent cover. Inside the vents, you'll be taken to a couple of dead ends, and you can also see the butcher wheeling his cart through the hallways of the bunker. Now you know he's a threat here. He can also be seen or heard wheeling his cart in the kitchen earlier, but he does it less often now. The vents will take you to a security room with a computer that doesn't work without a floppy disk. There's a key to the pump room in the drawers, as well as a useless hex key. Nothing needs to be lockpicked in the bunker, so I'm not at all sure why it's here. Actually, in the update that came out while I was making this video, the hex key found in here was removed, so that confirms its uselessness. There's also a note that talks about some Project Jolly, and how someone named Harold Gutstein had a mental health crisis and killed several people, and needed to be shot. His remains were stored in the freezer downstairs. The bunker is a very different setting from the house, and I love it for this reason. It's much more industrial and clean, mostly, and that's because it's a secret underground government facility. Some may think the ordinary house with secret government facility underneath trope is overused, but I personally can't get enough of it, and I love it here. The pump room key can be used to open the pump room. Shocking, I know, the world may never be the same after this discovery. Inside is a pump machine that claims B1 and B3 did their chores on time, whereas B2 is in timeout. A note on the wall says B2 is flooded, and you'll need to go in and manually clear the clogs blocking the drains that allow the pump to do its thing. Another vent cover takes you to a slightly bigger vent system. One way leads to water with buggy rendering. That must be B2. Another leads to the save room of the bunker, with another free videotape waiting inside. This room isn't as cozy as the house's save room, but it'll have to do. Finally, the vent opens into a large garage area, the second most open in the game. You can unlock 2 different doors that lead in here to create a full loop around B1. As you do so, you'll see this corpse on the ground with bullets around it, looking at you. That's because it isn't a corpse. Not yet.
Don't worry, I'll get you out.
It's too late.
Don't say that.
You have to stop the demon downstairs. You have to destroy this entire facility. I am out of time. Shut down the reactor. It'll cause a meltdown, but it'll kill that thing and wipe this evil place off the planet. There are 2 shutdown keys somewhere. You can get the code.
And just like that, this game went from stay out of the house to detonate the house. Next to the now dead man is an old revolver. It functions exactly like the revolver in the house. It's just here if you didn't bring the other revolver in with you, or you began a new game in the bunker. With your newfound objective, you find bolt cutters in the corner of the room, which you can use to cut open one of the animal cages, revealing the blue shutdown key. And a note from the former janitor at the bunker, which is probably why the shutdown key was in here. By now we've covered a lot of ground, so before I forget, let's cover how the stealth gameplay is different in the bunker. You still hide from the butcher, same as usual, but this time, he's brought his dog. The same dog from the backyard. I assume that if you kill it in the backyard, then it doesn't show up down here, but I could be wrong. The dog is your sub-threat for this area, just as Grandma was for the house. The dog could be seen as an upgrade to Grandma since it takes more than one gunshot to kill, and it can actually attack you. It's blind, so unless you walk around, it won't be able to tell that you're there. Most of the time. If it hears just one sound though, it can use that to pinpoint your location and chase after you. Thing is, it's really not threatening in chase. It's really slow, probably on purpose since it's blind, and I found it way easier to juke than expected. Plus, even if it does bite, it doesn't even deal that much damage. And despite it being a dog, which can bark, it doesn't alert the butcher whatsoever if it sees you. Granted, the butcher tends to be busier in the bunker and is usually too far to hear stuff, but if the dog had the ability to alert the butcher as well as chase you, it would definitely be an upgrade from Grandma. As it is, it barely poses a threat and is more of an annoyance than anything else. I haven't even mentioned the fact that a loud heartbeat sound starts playing when it gets near, as well as some strange growls and stomach noises. The dog basically has a terror radius. Sure would be nice if the butcher had that. As for the man, creature, thing himself, he's only a little bit different. As usual, he patrols, he sees, he chases, and he hammers. While in the bunker, he wears some lab coat or suit-looking thing, which I like a lot. He also carries on the trend of doing more than just hunting you. As mentioned before, he carries a cart through the bunker from this metal door here that probably connects to the house, down the hallway to the elevator that only he can access for now. He then takes the cart down the elevator to B3, B2 is inaccessible from the elevator since it's flooded. Eventually, he'll bring the cart back up. He sometimes does leave the cart somewhere and check some of the rooms by just walking around, but for the most part, this is what the butcher is up to down here. I really like this. As I said earlier, he doesn't feel like just a stealth game enemy. He's clearly working on stuff while you sneak around, which helps to make the game more immersive. However, the cart makes a lot of noise as he wheels it around, and the elevator makes even more noise than that. Until this point, all you had to go off of was the butcher's footsteps, which only became audible when he was right nearby. But now the cart noises announce the butcher's presence from a mile away, and once you realize that the siren noise is the elevator, now you can easily tell which floor the butcher is on. While he's on B3, he's no threat to you on B1. The elevator is the only way for him to get to and from B3 after all, so he cannot possibly surprise you. The only remaining threat after that is the dog, and I've already been over how effective of a threat that thing is. All of this is to say that I find the bunker a lot easier than the house, and a bit less scary as a result. Not that this is a bad thing, the game has been extremely stressful up until this point, so I am more than happy to be greeted with an easier section. Admittedly, the bunker does feel more like a standard horror game setting. You know the type, an underground facility with stone walls and 3 floors and probably a lab somewhere in it. The house was a bit more unique of a setting compared to this, but I still can't help but love the change in atmosphere. The bunker feels like a whole new game compared to the house, which is helped by the change in background ambience. Even the vents, which look mostly the same, sound much more mechanical and industrial than the vents in the house. The hallways are bigger and longer and have lights that cannot be turned off, and some that cannot be turned on. The light switches in the rooms look very different as well, and all the room lights themselves give off blue light rather than yellow. But along with the bigger hallways comes even bigger chances of escaping. The house was compact and claustrophobic. Part of what made it so scary was that if you got caught, there weren't many places you could run to. There were dead ends everywhere that would spell your doom if you were caught inside them. Something as simple as going upstairs was a huge risk because of how small the downstairs and upstairs were. He could be anywhere. It also helped that the butcher didn't wheel a cart around the house, so the only audio cue was his footsteps. And by the time you hear them, he may already be seeing you. Meanwhile, in the bunker, the butcher's location is nearly always signified, so you always know where to hide. And if you do get spotted, there are more places to run to than ever. Even if you do get caught and die, the death punishment isn't as big. You awaken in the cage with the pigs for both day 2 and 3. All your items are thrown in the cage with you, and you are thankfully able to escape before the pigs eat you. However, no cameras or tripwires are set up. As far as I'm aware, the bunker has no security systems whatsoever. Even dying is less important. The butcher doesn't even place bear traps anymore. Just to clarify, I don't mind any of this. These aren't complaints, just observations. The house is plenty scary enough and takes up the majority of the game. and the bunker still has its fair share of spooks, mostly involving B2. Let's get to that now. With all other options exhausted on B1, you have no choice but to sink into the vent water and swim through the flooded B2 to unclog the drains. This is one of the bunker's aforementioned spooks. This situation is nightmarish and I couldn't imagine being in it. Good thing Roxanne came supplied with 30-second water-breathing potions. It's possible to remove the bags from both drains and get back to the vent without dying. But just in case you're worried, there's a stairwell you can go into to get some air. Once both bags are taken out of the drains, you can head back into the vent and into the pump room, activate the pump to drain the water, wonder how the bags aren't just being pulled back into the drains to clog them all over again, and finally explore B2 properly. This floor is entirely dark since the water killed most of the lights. It makes for a really cool atmosphere and also allows you to see the entire floor with your flashlight off. There's a computer lab with a bunch of broken computers and a set of wire clippers for some reason. I should say there used to be a set of wire clippers. They were removed along with the hex key. Next, there's a break room that leads into the kitchen. The door to the kitchen is locked and for some reason it relocks itself every time you reload a save. One of the only doors to do this. On the door is a note talking about a swarm of biting bugs in the vents and how they ordered bug spray to take care of them. Said bugs are in the vent right behind you. You'll need to find that bug spray before you can go in that vent. For now, you can go into the freezer where Gutstein was supposedly shot. Oddly enough, there are 2 bodies in here, but nothing else obvious. Next up is a security room with 2 big doors locking important documents and things inside. There's a button outside that opens them. Great security. Inside is a floppy disk inside the slot, but taking the disk out shuts the security doors. The disk is meant for the computer upstairs, but for now you'll need to put it back in order to open the doors. It's worth noting that the butcher and the dog can come down to B2 now that you've unlocked it. Both of them need to take the stairs, so there's only one entrance. The butcher also uses a flashlight when on this floor, or when in other dark areas of the bunker, since there are no working lights. I've always liked that detail. While locked in the security room, it doesn't seem like the butcher can see you from outside, funnily enough. It may also be possible to trap the butcher or the dog in this room and never have to worry about them ever again, but I'm not 100% sure. The remaining rooms on B2 are a conference room that's locked, another barrel room with an interesting note that apparently shows the shutdown code, and a bunch of dorms for the employees. Most of these rooms don't have anything, but one has a footlocker that's locked with a code. This is the only puzzle in Stay Out of the House that I had to look up. In the freezer from earlier, there's actually a well-hidden note clutched in the hand of one of the bodies. It's a note for someone else claiming that the other shutdown key is in that footlocker, and that the code is the drug he and his friend did on the beach one night. Said drug is obviously 4 letters and starts with A. All of you watching right now are probably shouting, "It's acid!" and have immediately figured this puzzle out. I guess I'm completely stupid because I didn't figure it out. I had heard acid used as a drug term before, but must have forgotten it in the stress of the game. Plus, I don't spend all my days steeped in drugs, so I wasn't sure if it was some other drug name I had never heard of or not. On top of that, you still need to convert the letters to numbers. I did at one point try inputting acid by using numbers that looked like the letters. Turns out it's simpler than that. You use the number that corresponds with each letter's placement in the alphabet. The code is 1394. In hindsight, this puzzle is pretty simple. I don't know, am I just dumb? Was this extremely obvious to everyone else playing and I'm just bad at life? I don't hold this against the game, it is a good puzzle. I just think it's weird that this puzzle expects you to know exactly what it's talking about when no other puzzle does. There's probably someone who got completely stuck here because they've never heard acid used as a term for drugs. Anyway, inside the footlocker is the red shutdown key, but also a journal written by a former employee. They say their job was great at first, but then they started hearing people screaming from the lower floors where they weren't allowed, and other employees started going missing. Eventually, the bunker went into lockdown, and they stopped writing there. With both shutdown keys in hand, the next step is getting down to B3. Only the elevator can go there, but there's a running fan in the vents blocking the way. The first note in the room with the computer mentions the operations disk in the security room, the one that locks you in if you take it out, and that it can be used to turn off the HVAC system, which would stop the fan. By searching one of the computers in the computer lab, one of them has a disk labeled Notes, which can be used as a replacement disk in the security room. A classic Resident Evil-like puzzle. I love it. The operations disk is wet from the flood and must be dried. Thankfully, there's a convenient stream of warm air in one of the rooms on B1. After that, put it into the computer and prepare for a tough puzzle. It's one of these slider puzzles that always takes a lot of time. The pattern it wants you to make will take some time to figure out, and then actually making it will take some time after that, so it's a good thing neither the butcher nor the dog enter this room that often. Also, this puzzle is randomly generated, one of, if not the only puzzles, to not have a consistent solution. Once the puzzle is done, you can turn off the vent fan. By the way, it is possible to bring the notes disk up to the computer on B1. This disk too needs to be dried first. Doing this allows you to read an annual report talking about a bunch of workshops being set up to address a leakage of nuclear radiation. The report itself seems incomplete or even glitched, so not much is revealed here. I just find it awesome how you can find the secret if you think to try putting the non-required disk in the computer. Now you can climb into the elevator shaft. You might think you have to wait for the butcher to bring it up to B1, but there's no fall damage on medium, so no need for that. Climb on top, wait until the butcher's not inside, and then open the hatch and take it down to B3. And no, the butcher is not at all concerned by the elevator making noise without him being in it. Down on B3, you find a red door that's locked, a long creepier tunnel that you should avoid, and the main attraction down here, this lab that looks straight out of Resident Evil 2 Remake. There's another screwdriver in here because the elevator closed behind you when you went out. You can't open the elevator door, only the butcher can. Similar to the garage area, there's only one way out, and that is using a screwdriver, so the game is happy to give you one. This does mean that you can gather the 3 screwdrivers together to have a little screwdriver jamboree. If I'm not mistaken, the screwdriver is the only non-bandage item that has this many duplicates. There's a door up and a door down. The door up goes to a small hallway with a few suspicious rooms. One with a chair placed in front of a TV, one with the most uncomfortable medical bed I've seen that randomly has the bug spray can that you need on it, and one that has a TV set of an office space. Facing it is some thing that looks like a camera, but also looks more malicious than a camera, especially with the "Danger, don't look directly at lens" sign on it. Behind the desk is a note with a script for a sermon. One of the sermons that play on the TVs around the game. This must be where at least some of them were filmed. Or laser turreted, I don't know. The final room contains a strange purple orb connected to a machine. There's a lever on the wall that turns it on, and if you ignore the warning sign above, the whole room starts glowing with blue energy. It doesn't kill you, but it activates the camera turret thing, which gives it the same effect as the TVs if you stare at the lens. By the way, look at a TV too long and you get an instant game over. So don't do that. Something I ignored at the start of the hallway is an experiment journal written by Dr. Anthony Tambo. Animals have been exposed to mimetic waves that seem to allow them to communicate mentally. Monkeys were seemingly getting more intelligent and also violent. After a while, human test subjects were brought in and put through the same experiments, after which a few of the subjects grew violent, notably number 918 who had to be killed because they were escaping their restraints. One page mentions that the mimetic waves are being sent through VHS tapes, the same ones used to run the evangelical sermons, the same ones being offered by the Church of Father's Vision. This is why looking at the TVs gives you a headache, because it's not a headache. It's whatever effects the VHS tapes are giving out, taking you over. Which begs the question, is the church affiliated with this lab, known as CFV? Is the church a cover-up for what they're doing down here? Maybe this is why the pastor in the prologue left the church group, because they weren't a real church group, just acting as one for the sake of these experiments. We won't dwell too deep into this for now. The door on the lower floor of the lab leads to some CFV-sponsored prison cells. Each cell has a ton of TVs blasting their sermons at any unfortunate inmates. The light switches for the cells are located outside each cell's door, which is a really good detail. The important thing is that each cell has a vent you can unscrew with the screwdriver you obtained. This vent system passes by an unfamiliar room that looks straight out of Half-Life. After that is a ladder leading to a drop into a conference room, which is later revealed to be on B2, same floor you need to spray the bugs. How convenient! But before that, I'm sure you're wondering what's down that tunnel on B3. It's the same one that you're pulled through in the game over sequence, and now you get the chance to see what's behind that door. Only to get caught by the butcher just before you reach it. After that, you see this!
It's just a momentary lapse in faith. So, if they can escape now. Is so much greater than your own fear.
I have mixed thoughts about this. It's cool that you get to see the demon downstairs and it's just as horrific as you imagined, and it's a neat alternate game over, but how this ending is designed in the gameplay side of things rubs me the wrong way. First of all, why is the Butcher in his default outfit again? I know his alternate costumes were added post-launch, but I like how he's dressed differently in the bunker, and in the house on the third day apparently. My real problem with this ending is how it's an instant game over that you can't really see coming. You're sent back to your last save just because you walked down a hallway. How bad this is depends on how recently you saved. This ending could result in redoing just a few things, or it could result in being sent all the way back into the house if you happen to go all that way without saving in the bunker once. I understand not wanting to warn the player that they're about to see an ending, but at least make an autosave that the player can jump into afterwards to pick up where they left off. Because, come on, everyone is going to go down this hallway. It's shown in the normal game over cutscene. Every player is going to want to know what's down this tunnel. I don't think they should be blindsided with a bad ending that forces them to redo progress. It reminds me of the barbed wire pit in Nun Massacre. Falling into this thing triggers a bad ending that takes you to the credits. Nun Massacre has a 3 life system, but just falling into this pit burns through all of them and makes you restart the game. The same goes for this dead end in the vents. Instant bad ending that forces a restart. I didn't like it there, and I don't like it here either. So, ignoring that hallway, you go and BFG 9000 all of the bugs in the kitchen vent. The vent drops into a space that drops into the unfamiliar room. The very same room viewable from the B3 vent system. The door to this room is revealed to be the locked red room on B3. This is the reactor room, the final room of the game. This is where you put in the shutdown keys and codes. Yes, codes. There are 2, one for each key. The note in this room was once bugged and had its text all messed up, meaning you couldn't read the 3rd step in the instructions, but this has since been fixed. Turns out the 3rd step is just await instructions. Anticlimactic. The key slots in both of the big important rooms are color-coded with the respective key required. After putting in the key, the code for that room is put in on these camouflaging buttons on the opposite side of the room. The color changes when you put the key in, but still, it took me a while to find out you could interact with this. But we only have one note containing one shutdown code. What does this even mean? This is another one of my favorite puzzles to figure out. Back up in the secure storage room is a panel in the corner that generates a shutdown code for each key. Put the blue key in and you get a very long code that you will most definitely have to write down. Put the red key in and you get an error. Great. It's pretty simple from there. The blue key's code is the code it showed on the panel, and the red key's code is the pattern on the note. I was still uncertain about this process, especially since that one note was bugged, so doing this on my first playthrough was pure guesswork. Seeing it work was just as satisfying as figuring out the bunker code. Once both codes are in, the bunker starts exploding, because of course it does. I don't know why shutting down a reactor always involves said reactor exploding, but just like the farmhouse with government facility hidden underneath trope, it's a trope I can't get enough of. The locked doors you've been seeing through the bunker are now unlocked, allowing you to make your way back up to the B1 garage. The shake effects when going through the vents are a little violent, but otherwise, this is a cool escape sequence. The final door to get through gets blocked by a cave-in of rubble, because of course it does. And guess who's going to take advantage of that? The Butcher is much slower here, but this room is not endless. Lure him to the other side, then run back to the door and pull away the beams one by one. Only one of the beams may be pulled away at a time. Stun the Butcher with the gun if you need more time. And avoid the pillars of fire, they deal a lot of damage. Unlike the other ending, you are given your remaining lives in the form of chances if you die. Nice detail. This part isn't too hard, but it's very stressful your first time. Once all the rubble is clear though, you're free. And you took out the Butcher's house in the process. Roxanne awakes in a hospital, clearly having no memory of what happened between then and now. She's been in a coma for a few days apparently, and is scheduled for surgery to help fix it, I guess. But before that surgery can happen, she throws up the same leech-looking thing, and the next thing you know, the entire hospital is red for some reason. You get to walk around briefly and see that all the other beds are either covered in blood or have these things on them. The lobby is full of facehugger eggs, and the outside is replaced by a void of red. It's unclear if this is a dream or reality, meaning Roxanne's fate is once again unclear. But hey, you blew up the butcher's house, so it's not an entirely anticlimactic ending. It is by far the better ending, not just to me, but to Puppet Combo, as the achievement for this ending is actually called The End. The other one was called Parasite. That is the main progression of Stay Out of the House fully covered. With that info in mind, it's time for me to get negative. As much as I love this game, I have some gripes with it, ranging from major to minor. I've been over some of my complaints throughout the video thus far, but now it's time to go over all the rest of them. I would have started this off with what I called the jumpy bunker radar bug. Basically, if you brought the radar into the bunker, anytime the radar picked up the dog, and specifically the dog, Roxanne would be bounced into the air each time the radar beeped. Not only did this force you to make noise, but it could even clip you through walls and get you stuck. The solution would be to drop the radar and never use it, which worked, but wasn't ideal. Turns out, the update that happened while making this video seems to have taken care of this bug. At least it never happened to me on my most recent playthrough. So this isn't really a problem anymore, therefore, onto my real issues with the game. The inventory system is really clunky. I like how you have 5 slots by default instead of Nun Massacres 3 on medium difficulty. And I like that you can now use the number keys to change items instead of just scroll wheel, but that's about where positives end. I don't know why there's a cooldown between switching items. It's very easy to forget which slot an item is in, and because you can't change the slot an item is in without dropping everything and picking them back up in a different order, you'll be sitting there pressing every single inventory button until you find what you want, which takes an annoyingly long time. You can use the inventory screen to change items, but again, this is the fastest you can scroll through them. It's not any better than switching them outside of the inventory. In fact, it's worse because you can't move while doing it. This problem gets worse when you get the backpack. The extra inventory space is great, but now you have 8 items to switch between. This is why the flashlight is such a big upgrade from the lighter. You just press a button instead of fumbling with your items for 5 seconds trying to find the stupid thing. Oh, and after certain animations are done, an item you used might change its location in your inventory for no reason, so you'll probably be swapping to the wrong item for a while afterwards if you're using the number keys. Plus, the inventory screen showing this no sign as the none option for just de-equipping your items is kind of misleading, as it looks like it would represent an empty slot. But it's always there, even if your inventory is full. A simple solution for the item switch problem is to show a hotbar of all the items and which slot they are in when you switch. That way you can switch to the correct item right after, even if you go to the wrong one the first time. I also really wish that the interact and use item buttons were separated. There's just one action button in the controls, and it's bound to left click by default. The action button is used to interact with doors, light switches, etc. if the item you're holding doesn't have an immediate function. If it does, like swinging the hammer, the game overrides your interactions with that one action. While holding the hammer, you cannot turn on or off lights, pick up items, hide under beds, or open doors without pushing them. You can only swing the hammer. The same goes for the gun, bandages, the alarm clock, and bear traps, or the knife. Holding these items prevents you from interacting with anything. They only let you use or place the item. I have no idea why this is. It only serves to annoy and makes switching between items even more irritating. There is something you can do to alleviate this, so let me give a pro tip. In the controls menu are 2 buttons for the 9th and 10th inventory slots, which don't actually exist. Take one of these and bind it to a button near WASD. Many of the keys around WASD are used up, so you may have to shift some controls around. Do this and you now have a dedicated unequip button so you can interact with things more easily. Splitting the action button into an interact and use item button would still be better, but doing this helps a lot. Speaking of controls, I kinda wish they were explained somewhere. There is a controls menu, and you probably should go look at it before playing the game. But nowhere outside of this screen, except for the reload button, are these controls ever shown. Nun Massacre had a simple list on the menu as you went to start the game. It may be overwhelming, but it works fine. My two main problems are that Z is an unintuitive button for the inventory. Most games like this use tab, and most players are used to the button being tab. Maybe tab wasn't chosen because pressing the tilde key opens a console, and it's easy to accidentally do that, but if you're going to bind it to Z, maybe you should explain that somewhere. My other problem is the lockpick minigames. Though they're straightforward when you get to know them, they can feel awkward and confusing at first, especially when you don't know that D pushes the lock forward, or that escape is used to back out of them, which is not what I would have guessed. You're likely to sit there trying all kinds of buttons with risk of being caught by the butcher, since even though there's a note giving you a rough idea of lockpicking, the controls of lockpicking are never explained. Fortunately, lockpicking is simple after you figure it out, so I'm okay with the way it is. I want to end this part by mentioning that past versions of Stay Out of the House had a bug where you couldn't look at the control screen from in-game, only from the menu. This has been fixed since, so it's no longer a problem. Many of the notes in the game have some grammatical errors, and these can make notes slightly confusing to read at first. The notes are still clearly understandable, but I would think these are simple fixes to make, especially since other languages were added to the game since launch. I wonder how the acid puzzle is done in other languages. Speaking of notes, the note in the save room talking about needing to find food or water and manage bleeding is referring to hard mode, which we'll get to later. Nothing's wrong with the note, but my question is, why is it on the lower difficulties when those mechanics don't apply there? On my first playthrough, I was under the impression that I would eventually die of thirst if I didn't find their water supply from the kitchen or the storage room or something, which added a lot of stress to an already stressful game. Having the note appear on these lower difficulties is a bit misleading since none of this matters. It's great information on hard and definitely should show up there, but it's useless on medium or lower. There is an achievement for finding every note in the game, including this one, but the solution to that is simple. Don't count this note for the achievement. There is at least one note exclusive to hard that isn't counted for the achievement, so just do the same for this one. While crouching, you're not supposed to make any noise, and you don't. But some parts of the floor are structured in such a way where you still make a loud landing noise even though you barely left contact with the floor. Just rubbing up against a car or prop or a pile of trash is enough to create the same loud landing sound that happens if you jump, leading to you making a bunch of noise through no fault of your own. Making a height threshold before the landing noise happens when dropping would fix this, since you shouldn't make the same amount of noise as jumping just for falling 1 centimeter. Rocks are strewn around the house, and only the house. There are none in the bunker, if I'm not mistaken, likely because of how limited their use is. They're supposed to be short-range distraction items. You throw a rock to create sound to lure the butcher out of a room, likely the kitchen, so you can sneak in there right behind him. However, he only responds to it half the time, and both the times it worked for me, I had to basically throw it next to him, which didn't really get me anywhere. Rocks could be used to distract the dog, if only they showed up in the area where the dog is most prevalent. Overall, rocks don't seem to work that well and aren't that useful as a result, just like a similar item from another horror game I like. A really strange bug happened to me once where when I put all the limbs on the scale, the clock I'm supposed to put the gear into disappeared from the room it's supposed to be in. It somehow phased through the wall into this other room. I have no idea how or why. Good thing it was still fully functional. There's an achievement called Death to CFV that you're supposed to get if you break any TV, but I broke many TVs and didn't get it. The achievement guides on Steam said they had to break multiple TVs as well. It's possible this achievement needs you to get every TV in the game and it just has the wrong description. The volume of the background ambience in most locations is very quiet for whatever reason. All ambience was much louder in my first playthrough, so I'm not sure what happened here. B3's ambience still has normal volume, and so do the prologues and endings, but every other background ambience has low volume in the current version. This could be intentional, but I'm not sure. There are many rendering issues throughout the game, most involving lighting. Very often, the light in a room will be on, but the room will appear dark looking into it because the game thinks I can't see the room, so it stops rendering the lights. It only fixes itself once I fully enter the room. This is kind of an issue in a game where you need to stay in dark areas. The absolute worst case is the backyard. Going anywhere near the edge in this corner causes the floodlights to stop rendering until I fully step out into the middle, and it just looks bad. There are similar cases with rooms or objects not rendering even if they're in clear view, but these were less common. A similar issue I have with the backyard, or even B2, involves the lighting system. When you stand in light, all dark areas are pitch black, but if you go in the dark, all nearby dark areas are now visible as Roxanne's eyes adjust to the dark, very Amnesia-esque. This effect is great and even welcome in indoor areas where there's a mix of light and dark. In the backyard, though, if I'm trying to get a better look at the dog from far away so I turn on my flashlight and attempt to see it, my vision should not decrease from that. Another issue I have with the backyard is the victims. The victims aren't a bad system at all in concept. The way they work is you open their cages to free them, after which you command them to follow you or wait somewhere with X. Your goal is to lead them through the house into the save room in the vents. Once here, they'll calm down, tell you their name, and provide some insight on the situation. One of them hints towards how to solve the bunker code. A couple of them even give you bandages for helping them. One of the victims outside has broken legs and you can't move her. All you can do is give her the candy bar you find in the attic. She'll also give you bandages for this. Another one of the victims is none other than Deborah, the character you play as in Night Shift, who tells her story of what happened on her shift. This is all really cool and good. Aside from one time a victim somehow glitched out of the map, their pathfinding is solid. And if you'd rather not have to escort NPC characters around, especially when the butcher can grab and kill them with one hit, then you don't have to. You miss their dialogue but are not punished in any further way. My main problem is this. The goal is to bring them to the save room, but the game never tells you this. So on my first playthrough, I ended up leaving them all behind the shed in the backyard. The butcher never found them back there, so it was the safest place I knew of. From there, I tried to get them out the front door. It only makes sense that you'd help them escape by bringing them to the route of escape. And you can do this, but nothing happens. They don't say anything at all, they just tag along for the ending, standing there awkwardly as you throw up the leech on the suspicious guy. I had to go look at a Steam guide to find out that you could take them into the save room at all. I had the thought that maybe some of them are too big to fit in the vents, so I'd ruled that out early on. If, after saving them, you return to the save room after unlocking the front door, Roxanne tells them to stay there, because she plans to call the police for help if she escapes. Otherwise, they'll need to get out on their own. Also, there are two different things she can say depending on if you unlocked the door or not. This dialogue is great and explains why bringing them out the front door doesn't do anything. So why not have Roxanne say, "I'm gonna bring you to a safe area in the vents" when she frees them initially? Overall, the victim system is great, but there needs to be some direction on where you should take them. Because when I'm handed an NPC character that I just freed from a cage, my first thought is to take them out of the house they're trapped in, not bring them to a special room inside the house. Why can't you open the inventory when you're under a bed? They just recently patched the game to allow you to turn on and off the flashlight when under a bed, but why not allow the inventory to be opened as well? On my first playthrough, I was unable to complete the can opener puzzle because I never found all 3 batteries. This was mostly because I didn't know there were 3 batteries. At a glance, having 2 batteries in the compartment looks full and finished, so I thought the game was bugging out when the thing still wouldn't work. I even started a new game just in case it was a bug. The message only says, "I need a battery," so I was unclear on how many there were. Turns out there are 3 batteries, and the third one was hidden 1 room away the whole time. Finding this out definitely made me feel smart. I wouldn't have had as much of a problem if the examine message just said, "I need 3 batteries." This is a very minor one, but why does hitting anything with the hammer that doesn't break make a squishing noise? It sounds like you're hitting a body or something, but this is a metal doorknob. Similarly minor and inconsequential is this one cupboard in the bunker that has both of its doors play the open and close sounds at different volumes. I guess one of them was greased more recently. And while we're here, why does the pop machine have cold cola when the Night Shift clearly establishes that this universe's Coca-Cola equivalent is known as broke? Okay, back to real complaints. The dog area in the backyard has absolutely nothing in it, and I don't know why. Personally, this is where I would have put the pressure valve, since it makes you sneak past the dog to unlock the area where the dog is more prevalent. As it is, I killed the dog on my first playthrough expecting to find something it was guarding, but there was absolutely nothing over there. The butcher also glitched out and stood at the entrance, unmoving. Apparently, if you die and go to day 3, the dog is actually let loose in the backyard. I don't have footage of this, so it makes a bit of sense there's nothing there now that I know that. Still, it feels like an obvious place to look, and yet there's nothing. Why does the half-buried skeleton have all caps text when nothing else in the game does? I really wish you could close doors. All doors start out closed whether you began a new game or loaded a save, but once you open them, you cannot close them again. Not without them slowly drifting back to being open, making annoying creaking sounds as they do. So very often you'll be in a room with the door wide open, fully exposed. It's not a big deal, and doors don't slow down the butcher or anything. I just like to be able to close them for the sake of my stress levels. Bear traps have only a bit of jank. First of all, placing down a safe bear trap of your own can be surprisingly hard to do correctly. Facing the ground while doing it could place it all slanted in the air like this. Facing straight forward always places them down properly, so you could just do that, but still, kinda weird. Also, the butcher sometimes places bear traps under the floor. They're still visible and interactable, but much harder to see for a reason that isn't intended. And while I'm at it, sometimes traps are only interactable from one specific angle, and I don't know why. It's possible both of these have been fixed in the latest version, as neither happened to me on my most recent playthrough. I had an odd bug in the bunker after dying. The elevator door on B1 was open, while the elevator itself was on B3. I decided to drop down and enter the elevator, and that's when I discovered the butcher's true secret. He's actually an Enderman. He also killed me in one hit. I have no idea what happened here. One time I took the elevator down to B3, but the butcher immediately brought it back up. I tried to shoot him with the gun, but the game thought differently and decided to force him to ignore the gun and kill me in this glitchy and janky way. So, if you get trapped in the elevator with the butcher, you die. Makes enough sense, but this moment just rubbed me the wrong way. The fact that he was able to bring the elevator up before I could leave, ignore the gun completely, and just kill me right through it? I know I could have and should have waited for him to move farther away, and this death was probably still my fault. But maybe more polish could be added to the elevator deaths. When you turn on the weird glowy machine on B3, the sound it makes can be clearly heard through walls, even up on B1. It's kind of an annoying sound, and considering how strict this game is with audio occlusion in other places, why occlusion wasn't added for this, I don't know. In the most recent version of the game, I saved and reloaded, and all of the bandages I had in the save room disappeared. They were just bandages, so it wasn't a big deal, but I sure hope that can't happen to important items like videotapes or the screwdriver. The shaking effect when you get hurt or when the bunker is exploding is too violent. It consistently causes the camera to clip outside the map, which is not ideal. Stay Out of the House is still being worked on, and they're making a darn good effort to address the bugs the game has. I can tell by reading all the patch notes that there were some big problems in the game at launch, and I'm glad I waited a few months to play it. I really appreciate these updates. They always improve the game, and there's a chance my criticisms can be addressed. However, one update that happened in the middle of my YouTube playthrough bugged my save file and prevented it from loading. All I saw upon trying to load it was a black screen, and I couldn't even pause. I had to Alt F4 to escape. This required me to start yet another new game. Thankfully, I was in the bunker, so I could just start there, and every save made on that version of the game worked just fine. Still, if Puppet Combo and whoever else helps them could test to see if saves from older versions break on the upcoming new version, you could save some headaches and frustrations. If an update will break saves, send out a warning ahead of time before releasing the update. And that wraps up my criticisms of the game. I was originally going to add that the inventory screen itself is messy and should be cleaned up, but they've actually done that. I was also going to say the text at the bottom of the inventory screen should be moved or resized, but then they did that too. So, thanks, I guess. We're not quite done with what this game has to offer, however. Before we get to the replayability of the game, I want to touch upon the story and how good I think it is. It's not the best story I've ever seen in a horror game or anything, you'd have to do a lot to surpass Soma. But it does a lot with a little, and makes something compelling while still leaving you with some unanswered questions. Nun Massacre's story is good, but when you're playing, nothing seems to make any sense. Why exactly am I going into this abandoned school and doing all these inventory puzzles to get deeper in, only to bury myself alive at the end? And why is there a crazy nun chasing me with a knife? Why is the school abandoned when I was told I'd be able to pick up my child from there? The answer is that Nun Massacre's story falls more on the psychological horror side of things. Your character already did pick up their daughter in the past. Now you play as them going back to the school in the future, where they are haunted by the guilt of their past, represented as the nun that hunts you down. The nun is very ghostly and doesn't make any noise for precisely this reason. Technically, she isn't real. Even though she can harm and kill you, whatever. Long story short, your character's daughter had an absolutely terrible time at that school, and you go back there to repent your misdeeds, I guess. I don't really know. All this is to say, even though Nun Massacre's story is good, I didn't find it that compelling because of how disconnected it felt from the gameplay. Stay Out of the House has a more grounded and realistic story. You've been kidnapped. Escape. That's all I really need out of a horror game story. This part is going to be subjective. Many people love psychological horror games, and I can understand why. But for me personally, I've always found the stories less engaging than something realistic and straightforward. Being kidnapped is a real-life thing, and it's scary. Being kidnapped by a cannibal is even worse. Stay Out of the House really makes me feel like I'm in that situation, which makes the game so engaging to play for me. But that is clearly not all there is to the story. It does go deeper than that. At first, it seems like a cannibal is doing his thing to survive, but then you find the notes in the closet, and it sounds more like he's feeding something else than himself. Then you find the bunker that connects directly to his house. There's all the employees that have regular jobs there, and then the secret experiments going on in the lab on B3. They've been using some kind of electromagnetic waves that can only be described using this abomination of a word. The waves are transmitted through the TVs playing the Church of Fathers Vision VHS tapes, some of which are in the house above. The waves make animals sometimes more intelligent, sometimes more violent, sometimes stronger. From here, there are loads of questions. Who is the butcher? What is his relation to this bunker, and why does said bunker connect to his house? Was the house a guise for the lab underneath? Was the butcher one of the employees and he was exposed to the danger waves which made him as strong as he is, and also as dumb as he is? Were the butcher's dog and the baby exposed to the same effects? I assume so, since there are so many TVs in the house. And what about Grandma? What's her role in this? Is she related to the butcher, or anyone else who worked in the bunker? Why does she seem unaffected by the danger waves despite staring at the living room TV all the time? Or is she affected by them, just in a different way? Maybe she's more intelligent instead of strong. Oh, and I should also probably ask questions about the giant red demon thing hanging out below all of this. The demon emits the same sermon recordings when you see it in the bad ending. Is it the source of the danger waves? Are the VHS tapes allowing the demon's influence through so they can control people and use them as slaves to feed it human fear or something? And what were these scientists trying to accomplish with all this? Is it a Resident Evil bioweapon kind of thing? None of this is answered definitively, and I like that. It brings in an element of fear of the unknown. There's lots of screwed up stuff happening here, and we may never know what it is for sure, but whatever you imagine is always scarier than the real answer. You don't have to know exactly what's happening, you just know it's bad, and you should probably proceed to blow the facility up in hopes it will not continue happening. This makes the true ending rewarding, even if Roxanne may not survive in the end. Or hell, even if lots of people don't survive in the end. I still don't know what the leech thing does when you throw it up. Anyway, the game manages to have all these mysteries while having an engaging story on the surface. And while that story on the surface is a pretty standard and common story for many horror games, Stay Out of the House uses its long, in-depth prologue and the strong atmosphere of the house and the bunker to make it stand out in spite of that, while still having mysteries about the game's world left unsolved. One of them in particular stands out to me. The TV in the living room plays an infomercial for a 90-day food bucket. It gives off the same danger waves as the other TVs. The weird thing is that according to the credits, there should be another food bucket salesman voiced by someone else somewhere, but this and the TV in the bunker ending are the only TVs that play this infomercial, and it's always the same voice, so where's the second food bucket salesman? Game theory, get to it. I digress. For all I know, Stay Out of the House's story could be Swiss cheese. A lot of disconnected plot points that don't mean much and are just there for the sake of vagueness. But if that were the case, I wouldn't care. Because the story on the surface of you've been kidnapped by a cannibal dude, escape him, and why not blow up his house while you're at it, is so compelling that it works for me. Now for our final topic. How replayable is Stay Out of the House? Interestingly, at least on Medium, the important items do not change locations and all of the codes are the same. Yet the game that inspired Stay Out of the House, Granny, always shuffles around the items so that you'll be doing things in a different order on every playthrough. So does this mean that Stay Out of the House is one of those games that's excellent on a first run but starts to get predictable, formulaic, and boring on subsequent playthroughs? Definitely not. For starters, there are multiple difficulties. I've been discussing the game as it is on Medium, but there's also an easy and hard mode, as well as an explore mode. Easy mode will remove the camera in the dining room, so cameras will only appear if you die. More items in the game will also have glints applied to them, such as the nails or the screws holding in the boards or vent covers. Aside from this and taking less damage from things, this difficulty is little different from Medium. Then there's Hard. As mentioned before, Hard adds survival mechanics to the game. You need to keep yourself fed and hydrated with the new water canteens and snack items placed throughout the game. On top of this, being hit can induce bleeding, which is exactly what it sounds like. You'll need a special type of bandage to fix that rather than the standard healing ones. Your inventory is lowered down to 3 slots at the start, same as Nun Massacre gave you. There are also many new cameras set up at the start of the game. The Butcher hears noises you make from much further away, and Roxanne's eyes no longer adjust to the dark nearly as quickly. It's much harder to see what you're doing without light. Finally, there is now fall damage, meaning you can no longer do tricks like this anymore. Shame. Hard mode adds a whole new way to experience the game if you're up for the challenge. It's one of the better harder difficulties I've seen in a game. I also found a new note with a new code to something, likely somewhere with extra food. Then there's Explore mode. This is the same as Medium except there are no enemies. No Butcher, no Grandma, no dog, no baby. Except for certain moments like the ending sequences, the Butcher still shows up to chase you in those. Otherwise, you're free to explore the house. You can play this mode if you want to make a mental route to take through the game before starting a real run. You can even get the endings this way if you want. It's also useful for getting footage to use in video essays. Explore mode also provides the opportunity to discover something amazing. Remember the gun and the hammer and how I said they have a semi-secret ability? It's time to reveal that now. Both of them are able to break the knobs off of doors. The hammer has to take multiple hits that create a bit of noise, and although the gun can break them in one hit, that makes much more noise. If you break the knob off of a locked door, that door will unlock prematurely and you can get inside. You're probably starting to see the potential in this ability. This can be used to skip certain puzzles of the game. No need to undo the boards on this door or crawl through the tunnel. Just break the knob off the bedroom with the drain cleaner to get there slightly early. Getting into the garage area is usually a hassle since it involves going into the kitchen. But if you break the knob off the broken door in the foyer, you can move it out of the way and jump over the boards, skipping the need to get the wire clippers and thus the rubbing alcohol. Don't want to bother with collecting the limbs or going through the attic? No problem, break the knob off the back door and get out that way instead. There are consequences for doing these. Getting in the drain cleaner room early means skipping the gun, so you'll want to undo the boards anyway. Skipping the wire clippers means no way to silently disable cameras or cut tripwires. And getting outside without going to the attic means no key to the shed, meaning no duct tape and no third battery. But there are still the victims you can save, and the pressure valve is accessible in the well, which can be used to unlock the bunker very early on. And all of this is possible with one of the first items you find in the game. Just like the best Metroidvanias, Stay Out of the House embraces sequence breaking. As long as it is possible to do, and you can deal with the consequences, you can play this game in pretty much whatever order you want. But there are some features implemented to prevent you from doing absolutely anything with just the hammer/gun, and that is titanium doorknobs. These knobs are attached to certain doors and cannot be broken. All of those doors require a key to be opened instead. Notable examples include the shed door and the front door, but there's also the door to the attic on the second floor, the door to the food storage room for whatever reason, and the door to the fuse box room. Instead of breaking those doors knobs with the hammer, you'll need to get your hands on the Butcher's Key. The Butcher's Key is an optional item hanging on the Butcher's back. Obviously, it's tricky to get. If you can manage to sneak up behind him, you can get it. just know that he will instantly spot you when you take it, so be prepared to run away. The far simpler method is to catch him in a bear trap and take the key while he's busy freeing himself. With this key in hand, we are able to skip the vast majority of this game's puzzles. A combination of butcher's key and doorknob breaking can take you into the attic far earlier than intended. You can't get to the other side of the attic without the plank from the garage, but knowing what you know now, just break the door to the garage area and take it. Make sure to unlock this door first though. The ventilation fan in the tunnel to the backyard is never on, even if the other fan is. So now, you can get all 3 batteries without getting the wire clippers, or collecting limbs, or even using the drain cleaner or hex key, if I'm not mistaken. This does leave you with fewer options in certain situations, but it's awesome that this is a possible route to beat the game. And the butcher's key isn't even that hard to get. There's a free safe bear trap in the closet under the stairs, and the butcher is distracted with chopping at the start of any new game. So just drop into the foyer at the start of the game, get into the closet, grab the bear trap, place it in the dining room, and set off the camera. This will easily lure him into the bear trap, allowing you to take the key within the first 5 minutes of the game. And it gets even better when you realize you can use the key to unlock the fuse room right away. Doing the puzzle here requires no other puzzles to be done, so you can unlock the bunker within the first 10 minutes of the game. If you know the code, you can go right in. There are so many ways to play this game, from the other difficulties to the sequence breaking and the 2 different endings and other such optional content. It keeps this game enticing to play long after you beat it for the first time. Figuring out that you could break doorknobs and realizing how much stuff you can skip because of that was one of my favorite moments upon returning to the game. And it's actually rewarded, because without this knowledge, this one room in the attic is never accessible. Knowing you can break doorknobs, you can break into the room. This is the baby's room, indicated by the toys in the crib, and the fact that the baby is sometimes in there looking at you. The creepy thing about this part is that I glanced away for a second, then it was gone when I looked back. Shortly after that, you hear a bang from the corner and see a baby-sized hole in the vent grate. You can unlock the vent with the screwdriver and see that it actually goes over the cage room that you wake up in. If you notice the vent in the ceiling while in that room, you can actually use a chair to jump up into it and get a sneak peek of the baby's room, albeit with no way to get inside at that time. The baby's room also contains a camera piece, which brings me to another mechanic. There are 3 camera pieces hidden in the house, one in the basement, another in the food storage area, and the 3rd in the baby's room. These are globally tracked across all playthroughs, so you won't find them again in new games. Find all 3 and you unlock a photo mode. There's not much to say other than the fact that this is the only way you can pause the game. This list of options scrolls extremely slowly for some reason, and I'm not sure why the CRT filter gets put on by default, but otherwise, I like this. You can take pictures of the butcher whenever he's just standing still. Unfortunately, you can't take a selfie because Roxanne is a ghost. Anyway, what can you do with this doorknob shattering info in the bunker? Well, you can break into the garage with the dying guy early and get into the vents, although you still need the pump room key thanks to this vent cover. But getting that key never took that long anyway. You can break open the conference room early, but the vent in here ultimately dead ends due to the cell's vent covers. It does give you a sneak peek of B3 though. The biggest thing you can do is break into the reactor room, skipping the need to get the bug spray to kill the bugs. Another thing about repeat playthroughs, if you can remember all the codes, you could just put them in without finding where they're hidden first. Yet another way to skip certain things in the game that I'm a huge fan of. So if you have both shutdown keys when getting down to B3 and you know the shutdown codes already, you could just break into the reactor room, put all of them in, and beat the game right then and there. So despite the lack of change in item locations or codes, there are still so many different ways you can play Stay Out of the House, making it a very replayable game. I didn't expect it to be quite this replayable, but there really are this many potential routes and options to progress through the game. So even if you've watched this whole video and now have the whole game spoiled, there is still a lot of value in playing the game for yourself. So I must once again implore you to buy and play the game. That all being said, Nun Massacre does give the option to randomize its items, which is a good idea for a fun side mode. Randomizers are popular for a reason. With the right tweaks to the design, I'm sure a randomized mode could exist for the game and would increase replayability that much more, though it's perfectly fine that there isn't one. Finally, there's the subject of horror longevity. Is this game still going to be as scary in the future? Maybe. This depends on the individual's experience, however. Some people are more scared of certain things than others. I myself find Slender the 8 Pages to be a decently scary game to this day, but I know many others do not. From my experience, I have started to find holes in the Butcher's AI on repeat playthroughs that have led me to be a bit more bold while playing. But whenever the Butcher sees me and begins charging at me while screaming, that will never not be frightening. I will always have a rush of panic as I desperately try to run away. Because of this, I'm always going to be afraid of being spotted, which will make the experience of playing this game intense, no matter how many times I play it. This is supported by the excellent atmosphere and sound design in the game. I do not see this game aging badly whatsoever. And before you point out the graphics, that's an art style. The graphics have already aged because they're represented graphics from the 1990s. That does not count for this discussion. In my opinion, Stay Out of the House is a masterpiece of a horror game. I have played and seen many other stealth horror games over the years, but I have never seen one with such a perfect combination of atmosphere, story, and gameplay nuance. This game isn't reinventing the wheel or anything, but it's mastering all that makes horror games of this style so much fun to play. Finding your way through the house and solving the admittedly simple puzzles is satisfying and rewarding. Memorizing the layout of the game and trying to sneak around unnoticed, taking the safest route you know of while still having risk of being spotted, is intense and exciting. The Butcher is a terrifying threat, with great visual and sound design, and his house is gross and creepy, pushing you to keep playing in order to escape. The story is simple, yet effective on the surface, and under the surface are a lot of intriguing mysteries that leave you speculating on what could truly be happening. Every time you think you have the game's number, it throws a new twist at you to make you question how much you really know about this house, and what you're up against. Back in 2018 to 2019, I was a huge fan of Nun Massacre for most of those reasons. It was my favorite of Puppet Combo's games at the time, although I didn't actually play it for myself until last year. So when Puppet Combo revealed demos for their next upcoming game at the time, Stay Out of the House, and showed off the game's awesome prologue, Night Shift, and then I heard that the game would be a lot like Nun Massacre, I was very excited. I have been anticipating this game for about 3 years, and once it released, I played it a few months later, and it's safe to say that it has turned out better than I ever could have expected. I was constantly surprised with how much stuff there was and how fun the game was, despite how scary it was. And while I don't think the game is quite as scary as Nun Massacre, Stay Out of the House is still a big improvement over its spiritual predecessor on the gameplay and fun side of things. There are some bugs and minor issues. My biggest complaint aside from bugs would probably be the clunky inventory system, how long it takes to switch between items, the lack of an on-screen hotbar as you do so, and the fact that holding certain items prevents you from interacting with anything. But these issues, while they do exist, do not take away from all of the things the game does exceptionally well. And the inventory isn't something you can't get used to. For all of the above reasons, Stay Out of the House has become my favorite horror game of all time. It's going to take a lot for any other horror game to surpass it for me. So, I give this game a rating of 4 out of 10. This is a message to all the people that think indie horror games are dead, because all of the bad ones have been given the most attention. I can see where you're coming from, but as a Half-Life scientist once said,
"You are completely wrong."
There are plenty of great indie horror games being made to this day. They're just being buried and forgotten. And boy, do I have a buried and somewhat forgotten game for you. If you're a fan of indie horror games, but have felt as if there's a drought of them currently, you owe it to yourself to play Stay Out of the House.
I was working my shift at the Quick Mart. Everything was really creepy. And then this van drove by. I thought I was definitely gonna get killed. Then he ran in, smacked me across the head. Now here I am.
I was just passing through with my boyfriend. Brendan? Brendan! Where are you? Hi, boy. Are you lost?
too.
He simply needs some guidance to utilize those tools correctly. That's why you're here, with us.
You have to stop the demon downstairs. Shut down the reactor. It'll cause a meltdown, but it'll kill that thing and wipe this evil place off the planet.